Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Well, actually, it's still good morning here in California. So, good morning, everybody. This is Jason Flame, host of the Master Motivation Podcast. And I'm excited for our guest today. Let me introduce him very quickly. This is Kwazi, who has over 25 years of martial arts experience. He started in traditional Kung Fu in 1998. He earned his black belt as well as his instructor certification in Northern Eagle Claw Kung Fu and was a former co-owner of a school in New York from 2008 to 2011. Mr. Hewlett also trained in kickboxing and has been training in Krav Maga for the last 5 years, receiving his first degree black belt just last year in 2022. He's currently an instructor of Burbank Krav Maga and the host of Kung Fu Chronicles with over 10,000 subscribers. So Here we are. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being on.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I am great. As I mentioned to you pre-interview, and I just want to tell the audience, guys, if I happen to be looking down, it's not that I'm looking at my phone, scrolling on Facebook and seeing what's going on. I like to take notes throughout my interview, and so I'll be doing that throughout the show. We got a lot of things in common and a lot of things to talk about. And for those of you watching live, if you have any questions, please join in the conversation and let us know. And I'll be happy to throw those questions up on the screen. So, first thing I always like to kind of start with is just kind of give us a little more of your background, kind of, growing up. I think you were from New York. Is that right?
Yes, sure. Actually, I'm originally from New York. I was actually born in Wisconsin, but I was only there for like a couple of years. So memories of that are long gone. But grew up in New York City, specifically Queens, and, grew up pretty much in a stable home. Unfortunately, my parents divorced at an early age. So I was with my dad for the majority of the time. I went to live with him. And then from there, he remarried and we moved up to the further up north in New York. So I was in the suburbs in high school and was into sports like track and basketball, but I always had a love for martial arts. I just didn't really get into it full gear until I actually went to college, and I went to USC out here. So that's when I came out to California. And then after that, that's when I started getting into martial arts and things like that. Professionally, I'm in the radio business, so I do radio production, and I went to school actually for fine arts. So I always had a creative side to me. But then when I was in college, I actually kind of went off on a little detour because I did college radio. And so that's what got me into the radio side. I interned at a radio station, and one thing kind of led to another, and I started doing more of the radio work than I was working at an advertising agency at the time. And so I had to make a decision, and I made the decision to go with radio. And it's been my career ever since.
and here you are, right? So let's talk a little bit more about growing up in Queens. I don't know if you knew this, but my wife was actually born and raised in New York until she was about 8.
Oh,
then
really?
She moved to California. Yeah, she lived let's see, upper New York. I'm trying to think, Westchester County.
Westchester County. I was just going to say it because that's where I went to school in New Rochelle. So Westchester County, you got like Westchester, you got New Rochelle, White Plains, all Mamaroneck, all those places are up there. Yeah.
Cool. So what was it like growing up in New York, and what was it like moving from New York to California? I had a guest recently. We just kind of talked about the differences in the East Coast versus West Coast culture.
Sure. For me, it was a lot of fun. I always had that kind of rebellious spirit when I was growing up. So I always am more independent minded. So I really wanted to, when it was time to go to school, I wanted to go somewhere outside of the state. So I didn't want to stay in New York. And I always loved the idea of going to the West Coast. I hadn't been. My dad actually finally took me with him on a business trip to finally check out LA and everything. So I was in love from then. So I applied to all schools that were either West Coast or Midwest. And I, was fortunate to get into USC. So, to answer your question, the difference is, New York is very like hustle bustle. Everyone's moving, shaking and stuff. The mentality out here can be a little laid back at times, on the professional level. There's nothing wrong with that. It's, because it's laid back. The weather's nicer. But yeah, it's nice to be in both. I think for East Coast people, it's one of those things, either you love it or hate it. People come out here and it's like they really don't like the lifestyle at all. It's like the paparazzi thing, and it's like all that stuff. But like people like me, I love it because I'm good. I don't ever need to shovel snow again in my life. I'm fine.
something that we here in California don't know anything about, other than maybe, what was it, about a month ago, we had the lightest
Right.
sleet, snow, hail, whatever. And, you know, everybody went wild thinking, "Oh my gosh, what's that white stuff?" You know,
Exactly.
here in California. Yeah, you know, having lived here in California my entire life, I was really born and raised in Ventura County, so not too far from where I run my businesses and where my school is. But I visited New York and New Jersey several times because, again, my wife has family back there. And, you know, I visiting it, I just thought it was so cool. Like going into the city, like
Yeah.
it was just so cool. Here we are. We live, you know, outside of Los Angeles, and every time I visit like LA, every time I visit Beverly Hills, going to Malibu, you know, all the nice areas that people hear about, you know, all over the country, and I'm
Right.
like, we're within an hour of all of these places, and yet we don't often go. But when we went to visit New York, it just there was definitely I could feel a different vibe for sure. And interesting that you say how California is so super laid back because I feel like, you know, where we live too, there's kind of a lot of hustle and bustle, kind of a lot of moving and shaking, a lot of stuff going on. But I think when I was in New York, I was so almost surprised like how nice people were. Like because in California, like I don't know, maybe it was a little more in the New Jersey area when we were visiting
I
the
was gonna say it
family.
depends where you were, right?
Yeah, right. But I don't know. It's just it's always interesting to kind of talk about, you know, different places in the country, and we're so settled in here in California. So you ended up coming out here, going to school at USC. You applied to a bunch of schools, and obviously USC is the one that you picked.
Yes.
And a great school for, you know, radio, TV, film, the whole
Yeah,
deal, right?
absolutely. Yes, yes, yes.
Now, did you live the college experience? Did you have the whole deal? All the were you in a sorority or not a sorority, a
Fraternity.
fraternity? Excuse me.
Yeah,
And did that whole thing?
yeah, I soaked it all in. It was my first time, on my own, so I wanted to experience as much as possible. But I definitely wanted to stay focused and finish up and get decent grades. I mean, I
Hmm.
wasn't the brightest kid, but at the same time, I was never scared of doing hard work. But yeah, of course, I tried to experience as much as possible. The funny thing was, or not so much funny, but when I was in school, I didn't have a car.
Oh,
So, and in LA, it's different. That's the one thing I should mention. Like the big difference between LA and New York is public transportation is everything in New York. You don't need a
right,
car. You can just
right.
jump on a train and go pretty much anywhere, especially in the city and the boroughs. Out here, it's like you're stranded. So like weekends when like my roommates would leave, I'd be like, where am I gonna go? I was like, like get on the bus. Like, what do I do? But it's like you kind of figure it out. But yeah, to answer your question, I definitely experienced a lot. I did join a fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi is the fraternity. So I made a lot of friends through that and networking, and that was one of those things that was really advantageous for me. But yeah, I wanted to experience as much as possible and kind of just live it up and be a college kid and all that.
Yeah. Now you talked about, you know, creating those relationships in the fraternity and building you know, the social circle and the professional connections. Do you still keep in touch? Do you work with any of the guys that you went to school with?
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. I've got a little circle of friends that both between fraternity brothers and people that I went to college with. I think the majority of us make those connections when we're in. That's a benefit of going to college. I think for some people
Hmm.
too.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's definitely people that I still stay in touch with that I even work with. I've got two coworkers they're actually in my fraternity also. So yeah,
Wow.
it's great. Yeah, that's been
Yeah.
beneficial.
And so going in, you already kind of knew what your goals were, what your plans were. You wanted to get into radio?
So no, I went in with fine arts, like wanting to be an artist, wanting to be like I was really like heavy when I was a kid into like comic books and drawing and painting. That
Oh,
was my
okay.
thing. So I went in. I was going to get a fine arts degree, which I did, but I thought I was going to be like a designer, graphic designer. And
Hmm.
I just got detoured because like I told you earlier, I got into college radio. It was always just this kind of thing I just liked. I wanted to try it. And so, like in college, it's like, they give you like an hour to be on and you play at the time CDs, right? So like on there and, you crack the mic and you develop personality. But there's something about it that I just really liked doing and it just became this thing. So I figured when college was ending, I was like a few credits short. And I happened to look, like through some trades and found that one of the local stations was like they were doing internships. And so I just happened to apply for the internship. I followed up and finally I got a call back from one of the managers at the station, said, come on in for an interview. And things kind of started from there. I went in and I interviewed and I would put me on like 2 hours a week just helping out on a Friday night show. And then from there, I started doing more work there. You start, meeting more people, and things just kind of like gravitated from there. And I kind of came to this like kind of like point in the road where it was like I was doing so much on the radio side and enjoying it, but my full-time job was, like I couldn't put as much time in. So I was like, I just took a leap of faith and I actually quit my job and
Wow.
went into radio. I was like, all right, I'm just going to do this. So I started from an internship and they started paying me a little bit. It was like part-time work, but it was like finally I had to make a decision because I couldn't do two things at once.
Right. Now, growing up as a kid, you said you were into comic books and you're in all that stuff. What were some of the other passions that you had? You said that you hadn't gotten involved in martial arts until a little bit later in life, but what were some of your other passions as you were growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up just like that. Like I said, like a comic book nerd. I loved like watching martial arts movies and stuff. But I also loved, just like regular sports. So a lot of basketball, football. I didn't play, but basketball I played a lot. Just with friends and stuff. And then I ran track in high school, cross country, things like that. I actually did a little lacrosse towards my last 2 years in high school, which was just to do something different. I wanted to just try it. So I was always into things like that. Anything kind of athletic that was challenging. I did a little bit of swimming just to try it. I was one of those kind of people like, let me try it and see if I like it. If I don't like it, then I, move on to something else. But yeah, those were a lot of things that I like to do. And so the martial arts thing was always like a thing that I knew I wanted to try, but my parents never put me in like a specific school or anything. I'd be like, watching, Kung Fu Cinema on Saturdays, trying to emulate the moves and, do all that, whoa, and all that. It's like, you weren't really doing anything.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Now, you also mentioned that your parents were divorced, early on in your life. You went to live with your dad, but he remarried. What was that like for you? What was your experience growing up, not being with your mom all the time, having a, stepmom now? What was that like for you?
It was a struggle at first, and and I think when I growing up at an early age, I didn't realize how much of an effect it would have on me later. But yeah, you kind of, because there's kind of doubts you have. It's like, why did my mom abandon me, kind of thing, and all this stuff. So growing up with, but my dad was such a great influence and always has been, and he's a really great guy and just super dad, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I never felt unloved, and he's got a huge family, so my grandparents would help out. So he's a physician, so I was pretty much almost like a latchkey kid. So like literally I come home from school, and it's like old school term, right? So I like come home and just like, lock up and just do your homework and all that stuff and wait for him to come home.
Right.
Sometimes, but then like summer times I would spend out in Ohio with his folks, my grandparents. So I had a lot of family around me. So
Nice.
it was, definitely pros and cons to it. And I didn't unfortunately have as much of a relationship with my my biological mom as I would have liked to.
Did that change as you grew up?
So yes and no. When I went to college, I started to reach out more, and we started to try to reconnect. She was having some of her own issues and some like mental issues, unfortunately. So we never were able to truly like bond along the way. I stay in good contact with her sister, my aunt. So we still talk. Unfortunately, my mom actually passed away last year, the end of last year. But we were never able to really reestablish that connection because it was early. Like they got divorced when I was like 5. So and actually at first I went to live with her. She lived in with her family in Florida. So I lived like almost a year down there, but my mom just couldn't handle things. So finally she just gave my dad custody.
Got it. Now, what did your dad do?
He's a physician. He's a doctor. So he's an infectious disease specialist, as a matter of fact. So back in the 80s with like AIDS, when all that was new, he was doing a lot of research and stuff like that, and got heavy into it. So yeah, and he still practices now, just more on a consulting basis now.
Now, of course, other than your dad as one of your mentors as you were growing up, who were some other people that you would consider a mentor or role models for you?
Sure. Like, I had a lot of family, of course, my grandparents, my grandfather, who was actually a World War II vet, very influential in my life. Like I said, I spent summers with him. He's the guy that taught me how to drive. He taught me a lot of things just growing up, in addition to my dad. He would definitely be considered a mentor. I had some teachers even in school that were really, really good with me and helped me kind of find my way, so to speak. So definitely a few of those people. Yeah. So definitely people along the way that just came from different kind of avenues. Even like one of my coaches, my track coach, was really good guy, and would like always talk to me about, hey, what are your plans, and
Hmm.
you do you want to do more of this? And track wasn't necessarily my passion, but it was definitely something I knew was keeping me in shape. But I love the fact that he was a coach that would go beyond just like the track and field talk. It was they really cared about what you wanted to do with your life and things like that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Would you say that that track coach was one that really stuck out, with teachers and coaches? And I ask this because I know as you are an instructor at Burbank and you teach people Krav Maga, sometimes we forget the impact that we have on someone that lasts, literally a lifetime. So what was that coach, or were there other coaches that really stood out, really made a difference? In any specific examples?
Yeah, no, that coach he was great. I want to think even more so when I got to college, I had a really good mentor who was like a few grades above me. That was more of a really good mentor, like through my college years. So he was
Hmm.
kind of like a TA, teaching assistant, really good guy. He helped me along the way. He sticks out a little bit more. But my track coach, like it started kind of with him, I would think. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I just, I try to relay to my instructors at my school, no matter how young they are. I have instructors that start teaching at 14 years old,
That's
and
awesome.
and I always try to remind them. I say, these children, young kids as young as 3 years old, they grow up looking up to you. They grow up emulating you. They want to be like you, and sometimes that's kind of a hard deal to be an instructor and to have that kind of pressure bestowed upon you. You know.
Yeah, you don't you do forget that sometimes. There's like, I've even teaching class last night, and you kind of like, I don't know, like you probably do this sometimes. It's like, like you finish class, and be like, was that a good class, or was that okay? But then people will come up after you, oh my God, this is really a good class, and
Hmm.
sometimes you're like, what? It's like, okay, cool. It's like I didn't do anything special, but you
Right.
just don't know how you're affecting people. It's a great point. You don't, so it's like you always want to be, on your at your best, or
Yeah, you just really know exactly. I've had many classes where I'm like, it probably wasn't my best class in the world, but people are like, "Oh, that was so awesome," and
which is
or they'll
weird,
come back and they'll tell me stories about this class. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you remember that?" Like that's
right?
how powerful it is.
Yeah, yeah. And even to piggyback on your last question too, so mentoring, when I got into martial arts and really got serious into Kung Fu, my main instructor, who's still my friend now, it's like we're friends, my Sifu, Ken Edwards, still has a school out in Pasadena. He was definitely a mentor moving on, because I started martial arts out here, and then when I moved back to New York for work, I continued in the style system that I was in, and
Hmm.
basically got his blessing to do that. And I trained at the New York City headquarters. And but I still continue to call him, hey Sifu, I'm having issues with this or that. And he'd be like, hey, just hang in there, and make sure you talk to this person. They're really cool when I used to train out there and whatever. Yeah. So he's
Hmm.
definitely one of those, also one of those mentors that I still
Awesome. Well, I
friendship.
definitely want to talk a little bit more about the martial arts, but I wanted to
Oh,
follow up
sure.
with any mentors or people that you looked up to in the radio industry, radio personalities, people within your industry. Was there anybody that kind of helped you along, helped you kind of find your way?
Yeah, absolutely. A few people. So there's a program director who I'm still friends with today. His name's Michael Saunders. He used to be the program director at a Detroit station. Then he moved out to LA to be the program director at the station I was working at here at the time. And it just kind of started off as like, hey, kind of like buddy thing. Like, hey, like let me hear some of the promos, because the work that I do is like on the production side. So I'm actually one of those people that the stuff that comes in between the songs when you're listening, like say
Hmm.
it's like K-Rock, whatever. It's like I'm the guy that puts those things together. There's a voice, but also the sound effects. So I'm one of those
Hmm.
people that actually does that. So yeah, he would come in my studio and hey, let me hear something over here, but then also ask about, hey, how's your family? How's this? How's that? And we just started to have rapport, and we became friends, and we had mutual things that we like like sports. So basketball, football. We start,
Right.
and we still talk heavy football because he's a Dallas Cowboys fan. I'm a Dolphins fan, and we just always like talk and go to
Talking
games, all,
trash.
yeah, talking all that stuff. So yeah, he was definitely a big mentor for me in radio. Yeah, and still a really good friend to this day. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, so let's get into the martial arts. How did you originally start training in martial arts? I believe you started in Kung Fu, right? How did you find that?
So I actually started in Weichi-Ryu Karate first.
Oh,
So
okay.
this was so right after college, like I said, I finally was like, okay, I'm finally gonna do this and look for a teacher. But the teacher found me, so to speak. I was working at a movie theater, and I think this guy used to come in every once in a while. I'd be working at the front counter, and he would just say hello, and then I noticed he would come back, and then finally, I think he had like a patch or something. Hey, what's that patch? And he was like, oh, I do. I instruct some karate. Are you interested in learning? I was like, sure. So he told me where the studio was. I went out there, started training in it. So I did that for about a year and a half, I want to say. We did all of like the breaking boards and stuff, and I was like, I got my feet wet in that, but it never really truly connected for me. Like I was like, I always had this, kind of thing, the kung fu. I want to try that.
Right.
So I
And
moved.
that was out here, right? That was here in
Yeah, that was out
California where you
here.
started.
That was back in like the mid '90s. So that was out here. Everything started in California. So then I moved to Pasadena, and I said, you know what? I'm finally just going to do this. I looked and found the school, and that was happened to be right in the area. And I gave the instructor a call, who I mentioned, my Sifu Kenneth Edwards, and he said, sure, come on in, check us out. And I think, say it was a Monday, I went over to the school on a Tuesday, met with him. He told me when classes were. I checked, the whole area out and stuff. I said, hey, I'm coming back. I'm in. So I think I started that weekend, and I just never stopped. That's literally how I got started. And it was sorry.
What hooked you? What was the hook? I mean, like, and you're starting as an adult. A lot of my students, a lot of people, start as kids because mom or dad put them in it. I started at a rec center.
Right.
My mom was, huge Chuck Norris fan, and I
Yeah.
don't know how we ended up finding Dennis Ichikawa, who's my instructor and Mr. Cox's instructor, who was a student of Chuck Norris, and I was like, wow, that's just kind of random. And my mom happened to go to school with a man named Roger Lacombe, who I'll have on the show next week, who was already in Tong Soo Do, probably by the time they graduated. So it was just kind of all weird how it all came together, that I think that I was meant to do Tong Soo
Yes.
Do just in that way. But and you always wanted to do Kung Fu, and so you're into it, but what hooked you? What kept you there?
I think it was the idea. Also, it was when I first got to that school and kind of saw. Well, I'll tell you this straight up. Though, what hooked me was they were using all these weapons that I'd always seen on TV and never actually could like hold in my own hands. I was like, walked over to the weapons rack. He's got staffs. He's got whip chains. He's got all this stuff. I'm like, oh my god. So I think honestly, just visually, that's what hooked me first.
Yeah.
But then when I got and started doing the training, I just really liked the flow of the training. And it's not to knock Weichi-Ryu Karate. I really, I like that too. But there was something about the way, we were training. We trained a lot of stance work and stuff that, you're just, your knees are shaking at the end of class and all that stuff. And I knew that was coming anyway. That's the hard work part of it. But then finally the payoff is like you're starting to do some of the forms and seeing how these applications work realistically and the self-defense stuff. So that like this the style of training like really hooked me. But that first visual was definitely the weapons. And it's like, okay.
Now what year was this that you started?
So when I started Kung Fu, that was 98.
98. And are you still practicing?
Yeah, I still do. So it's not as much. Obviously, I'm doing Krav Maga and teaching a few times a week, but like on a weekend, Saturdays primarily, I'll go still up to the Pasadena school. Like I was just there this past Saturday, and I'll go help my Sifu just with his black belts and stuff. And I don't do any real teaching, but sometimes I'll do a little bit of training and things like that. So yeah, it's good to still be able to have that connection.
Now you were involved in as a co-owner of a school in New York as well.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah, so back when I moved back to New York after college, I stayed in LA until 2001, and I got a job opportunity in Florida. So I moved there for a year, exactly like 13 months. But then another opportunity came up. So the guy I was telling you about that became a mentor, Michael Saunders, he became the program director at this New York station, and gave me a call and said, hey, would you be interested in coming back to New York and working with me at the station? I'm just starting. I was like, hello, it's like market number one. So it's like literally it's a big deal in radio. So I was like, yeah, it just sounds great. So I moved back to New York. Long story short, when I came back to New York, I wanted to train again, and I called my Sifu, and he's like, hey, the New York City headquarters is there, like where our grandmaster was. So I signed up there, started training, and met another instructor who actually used to have a school in Puerto Rico. He was like high up on the chain, and we just kind of connected. He had his own school. I started, kind of training out there with him. And then he said, hey, I've always wanted to try and open up a school here. I was like, great, that sounds cool. He's like, but would you be interested in helping me? I'm like, Yeah, sure, I guess. Really, it started as an idea, and we, this place that he kind of used to rent out anyway, that he would kind of like have a shared space with, that they finally like opened it up and like we're like, hey, we want to lease this out. So we just kind of got ourselves together with. There was one other person that we were with that we kind of divided things and said, hey, you're better at the business side, you're better at marketing, and the head instructor was going to train, actually teach. So we went in and just leap of faith and got a spot, and we started a school. Unfortunately, it only lasted a few years, and mainly because my main instructor had some health issues with like one of his kids and stuff. So things kind of like we had to change locations and all this stuff. But yeah, that was a whole experience. I give you guys a lot of props. You guys that do this full time, because it's a big difference between just teaching versus actually being a school owner, as you definitely know. I'm like, oh my god.
Well, talk about some of the struggles that you faced as a business owner, probably not having business experience, right? Running your own business and then jumping into starting school. What were some of the first things right off the bat?
First of all, just thinking, just because you open up a business and put a sign on the door that people are automatically going to flock in. I was like, yeah, that's not happening. You actually got to pound the pavement. You got to promote yourself. You've got to, at the time, pass out flyers. It's like all this stuff on the business side, signing people up, like stuff I didn't know anything about that I had to kind of learn. And that's why it's great to have mentors like my instructor, who I gave him a call, obviously, right away. And, I was getting advice from him because he's owned the school out in Pasadena for now over like 30 years. So luckily, and he actually flew out. I actually flew him out for like a week to work with us. And it's like, hey, this is the best way to kind of structure things. This is what I do. Here's the billing company I use. He gave us a lot of great pointers. But it's a grind. It really is. So again, I give you guys all the props. You and Master Cox, you guys that are owning schools, Mr. Crouch is, hey, yeah, it's a full-time job. It really is. And I was still working a real job. So it was really a grind. So, at first it's the startup is tough. It's like you get like a couple students in and they tell their friends or whatever, and you start building. But in the beginning, it's a little slow. It can be. Maybe some people have quicker success, but yeah. And location's always the thing, right? Location's key. We had a school in Dumbo, which is in Brooklyn, and literally Dumbo is like, it's down under the Manhattan Bridge. That's what the acronyms stands for. And that we had this location, which it was an up and coming neighborhood, so we didn't have this like big, huge influx of people right away. It was like we had to do a lot of pavement pounding and stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and owning a business just by itself is difficult, right? Because when you're the owner of a business, I mean, you're on 24/7, 365, like that's your life. And then a martial arts school, because you build so many personal relationships within, like it's hard to run the school and be so business and not look at, the people as, individuals, and then you get really close, and that just changes the whole dynamic, I think, of the whole thing. Not to say that, we don't have standard business practices, but, there's certain decisions that you make that there's some emotional decisions that get made, with students. And I've learned a lot, fortunately for me, having two kids go through our program. Man, I learned a lot, just by my kids experiencing it and looking at it through a parent's eyes. Because, I started teaching when I was a teenager. I didn't know anything. I can remember how many parents used to tell me, the famous quote was, "You'll see when you have kids. It'll be different when you have kids." And I was like, nah, no, it won't. You don't know what you're talking about. I've been doing this, and oh my gosh, were they right? Because it literally changed everything. Because now, yes, it's a business, but like we literally have people's lives in our hands, especially with Krav Maga, teaching something that is so crucial to their safety, but also to how they grow in the school. I mean, you watch these kids who the instructors are their mentors, and they want to follow that example, and
oh, absolutely.
And we're trying to help them get good grades and learn how to be, contribute to society and be, active community members, and leadership skills, character education, so much more. I mean, people think, oh yeah, open a karate school, teach karate, go home. It is not that.
It's funny you mentioned the kids, because actually that's where initially with the school, that's where we started to have really big success. It was when we opened it up and had kids programs. That's like I kind of just spearheaded that, because the main instructor, he had another job also, but his main day where he couldn't teach was Saturdays, and Saturdays was the days where we had the most kids. So I ended up kind of taking over that kids class, and it just started to grow and grow. And it was like the whole idea of keeping it fun, and kids got limited attention spans anyway. But I like it. That's where I started to find success. But also, to your point, it's like, yeah, the kids, they're not just students. They start being, almost family. You consider them because you're seeing them
100%.
grow up, and you're like, wow, what you're doing is influencing them, and you really want to be, that good kind of a role model for them.
Well, we're part of their lives. A lot of people call the karate school their second home. I know for me, the martial arts school was definitely a second home. I had a great childhood, great growing up, did a lot of things with my parents. I had two younger brothers. We all did martial arts at one point. My brothers and I did martial arts together, but still the martial arts school, going to the school was like, it was just my place. It was just the place that I loved to be. And for so many of these students, it's the same way. It's like call it a safe place, call it a place where they feel loved, above and beyond everything else going on in life. But then also, we're part of these people's lives where I've been in several students' weddings, watched them have kids.
Right.
Unfortunately, we've had death where we've had students that have passed away, divorce, you name it, and we're part of it. And who do you think a lot of them come to have a shoulder to cry on, to have an ear to listen, and all of that, they come to their martial arts instructor. And maybe that's just the culture that I was brought up with, and maybe that's just the culture that we cultivate in our school, because maybe not every school is like that. But I know that that's been the experience for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like you're like martial artist instructor / therapist. Yeah, it's interesting. Like the people that will come to you and it's like, yeah, because these people become part of your family. You're right. It's absolutely true, and that's the part you don't know going in, but it's also very gratifying, again, knowing that people trust you on that other level too. People will tell you things that in the martial arts school they may not even tell their own families, and it's one of those things. It's like, hey, I totally get it. And like you're saying, that shoulder to cry on, sometimes they just need to get it out. But I can relate, because I've always felt like, yeah, that the school is like that safe place, the place you really love being at when you're not at your house or you're not at work or whatever. It's that, that second home. So I totally agree. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about how you found Burbank Krav Maga and started training with Chris Crouch.
Sure. So I, like I said, moved back to, so actually when I was in New York, I was there up until 2015. I lived in Jersey for a little while too. So it's funny you mentioned, I got to talk to your wife more, by the way, too, because I had no idea. I've like seen her so many times taking pictures as a school. Yeah. But anyway, so 2015, I moved back to California for another job. So I'm back in LA. And at this point, I've already gotten to a point in my Kung Fu career where I've gotten, like all the certificates and things, and I'm at that instructor level. I, got more than the approval to go off and do my thing. So I wanted to do some things differently. I already started doing like some extra training in New York anyway. I linked up with another guy I consider my mentor, who he used to actually train at the Jet Center back in the day when Benny the Jet, Sensei Benny the Jet, had his school out here. So he was in the fight circuit for a while. So I did kickboxing, like you mentioned before, with him. So I always had the idea to cross train. So when I got out here and, you get older, it's like I love all the fancy stuff and the tournament stuff. We do all the flips and kicks, but I wanted something a little more practical to add to my toolbox, so to speak. So I looked at Krav Maga first and just wanted to see where I figured either it was going to be somewhere close to my house or close to where I work. So Burbank Krav was close to where I worked. I tried this other place that was close to where I lived at the time. Went there. It was a little, the school was nice. The instructor was a little asking me like if I wanted to test within like the first 2 days. I'm like, bro, I just started. So I'm like, so I think maybe this isn't the place for me. So then I happened to look. It's like, all right, go online. It says Burbank Krav. Hey, it's like 5 minutes from my job. Let me go check it out. And literally, I walked in. The office manager was there and said, hey, come and try a class. And I did, and I just, kind of the rest was history. I just like the, the environment, the people. I like the teaching style, and it was just very practical, like, because just to be blunt, like Kung Fu is amazing and it's great, and foundation wise, it's like got a lot of benefits. But we never did like knife disarm, gun disarm, even like jujitsu stuff. So I really wanted something where you got a like little taste of everything in there, which Krav Maga does.
Right.
So I really just liked it. And, so many things were easier because you already have a leg up because your foundation work, a punch is a punch, a kick is a kick. So that
Right.
was already there. But just learning now these other skills, like stuff on the ground, I was a fish out of water. That was great. Getting into that. But like I said before, like the weapon disarming, really gravitated towards that. Like, and I still, it's one of the things I'm really like big into. So that's how it started, and I just kind of stuck with it, even through the pandemic and stuff. We went through the ups and downs or whatever, and that's how honestly I got started in the teaching area too, and really put that in the forefront, because during the pandemic is like we were Superman down. So it was just myself, Mr. Nelson, Eric Nelson, and Mr. Crouch, and there was three of us just teaching, like trying to keep everything afloat, and that's so. And then last year I went for my first degree black belt, which is its own intense thing.
And it is. Yes, it is. And,
as you know.
And I think, well, so, I've known Mr. Cox since I was a little kid. I mean, I've known Mr. Cox since I was 10 years old. I started training with him when I was about 17. I earned my black belt at 17. So right after 17, he actually offered me a job to come teach at his school. Nice. And I taught at his first school, DeSoto and Lassen. And so I kind of came up in the whole, early Chatsworth days. This was even before Krav Maga. But then I remember when he started introducing Krav Maga, and I was so involved in running my business, and I was so involved in the tournament scene in the early to late 90s or even early 2000s. I was still competing. I was really, our school really loved, demo team stuff, the extreme martial arts, XMA, or now we have Raptor Extreme Karate. And so, I was really into that. And I was just I was not ready to kind of dive into something else. I had also trained in Ketsugo Jiu-Jitsu, which was a Japanese system of Jiu-Jitsu that had a little bit of ground, but a lot more stand-up stuff. And so I just kind of felt like, I was already busy in all these other areas. But then, the time came, like you said, I wanted something that was more practical. I knew that what we were doing was a great art form. Yes. It was, martial arts has its tradition, and people have their thoughts on katas or forms. But I was looking for something very specific. I was looking to learn gun defense and knife defense. Yes. So I started training with Mr. Cox on Fridays with a couple other students at the time, Brandon Kemmer, Robbie Edelman. Yeah. And so it just kind of started out casual. And then, of course, the hooks get put in. And he's like, so you're going to test for yellow belt, right? And I'm like, oh, shit, here we go, right?
Yeah.
So but I was like, I was resisting that for so long because I knew what would happen. I knew that if I got into it, I wouldn't stop, right? Yes. And so, well, there it is. We tested, and a lot of people don't understand too that I think our system of, how we teach Krav Maga is a little bit different than other schools. We do, Mr. Cox, Mr. Carlin, Mr. Droscher, all the people that I learned from, obviously Mr. Hazan, everything is pressure tested. Everything is, very reality based. It's not like theory or some of the trash that you see online in videos, right? Because there's a lot of garbage out there. And so, but it really, that's what keeps me coming back, is because I have this sense of, I need to have a stronger sense of awareness, with my family and, with my school, and when I'm out in the community, or wherever I'm traveling, you want to have that sense of, insurance, if you will, right? Yeah, like sure. I have an idea of what I'm going to do. Cause like you said, with the ground stuff, being a fish out of water, when I first started with gun defense, that was fish out of water for me, because like I had never done it. As a matter of fact, I don't know that I had shot a gun more than a couple times in my life prior to getting involved in Krav Maga. Yeah, and so it's just a total lifestyle change. And, it helped me to develop my martial arts school and what we teach to bring, more of a blend. I still love the traditional martial arts side. I have friends who keep hounding me. When are you going to stop teaching forms? I really don't think I'll ever stop teaching forms. Is it our main focus? No, but it's part of what we do. Yes. Performance is part of what we do. Krav Maga is what we do. Sparring, jiu-jitsu. So, I just think that it's helped, round it out a little bit. a little bit more. And I'm
Oh,
sure for you
absolutely.
the same.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's a point. Yeah, and to piggyback on what you just said, it's like, yeah, I'm never gonna stop wanting to train in the traditional way as well. So I still go like the Saturdays when I can for my little dose of kung fu when I can go. Like I haven't done like the tournament circuit in a while, but let's face it, there's a certain amount of ego that goes with being a martial artist. There's a certain amount of that's why we get into it. Also, we want to put ourselves out there and show people what we can do. So that just that carries through, and I still have that desire and that passion. But to your point, I really wanted to make sure, like, I found if I was going to take another system, it was something where the focus was really on that self protection side and self defense side and being better at being aware for not even myself, for my family, my friends, all those things come into play. So it's like it's also opens up a new way of kind of looking at the world and how we view things and
oh man, totally.
And even my girlfriend's always like, all right, dude, it's like, I got you. You're like trying to move me out of the way or harm sometimes. I'm just checking the scene, It's like, but to your point, it does. It becomes a lifestyle. And it really does. Yeah. And I appreciate it every day. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this last topic. And, we got a little bit less than 10 minutes to go. So by the way, if anybody is watching live and you have any questions, would love to hear your questions. Would you love to hear your comments and have you engage with us in this story? But I want to talk about your podcast, Kung Fu Chronicles. How did you start your podcast?
So the channel Kung Fu Chronicles got started. Actually, there's probably people have a lot of similar stories. Right before the pandemic, I had this idea. Really started with a video in mind that was like, hey, I want to do something, but I want to actually, like take the plunge and have my own YouTube channel. But what would I talk about? I know I want it to be martial arts related. So, like I said, weapons was always the thing that was my jam. So I literally just kind of wrote down these things that I would do for this video. And then I finally just took the step and started the channel. But while I was doing the video, I put my first video up like during the pandemic, actually. So that hits, everyone's working from home. I have more time and I'm not a video editor, but I start using the stuff. But then as I'm doing videos, I created a few and I'm like, it'd be kind of cool to actually like talk to martial arts instructors, that I know or that are local and just get their side of the story, how they started. Just like, let me see what would happen. So I called my instructor first. And I said, hey, I'm going to come out to the school. Would you mind if I did a quick interview? He's like, absolutely. And by the way, my instructor, Ken Edwards, was, he used to be an actor. So for people that would recognize him, if you see a picture of him, he was in the first Mortal Kombat movie way back in the day. He had like a little blink and you miss it kind of scene, but at the same time as a fighting scene. So great. So he already had that in him. So when I interviewed him, it was a breeze. And then from there, I started reaching out to other instructors that I already knew. And then it kind of just grew and grew and grew. And during the pandemic, like I said, the blessing and the curse is obviously the curse is it was the pandemic, but the blessing is you had a lot more time on your hands than you used to. So it was like, I just went out and just started calling people and, hey, I'm going to come out. And it was my idea to go to them and make it as easy as possible. And I set up my little equipment and I, had my iPad with me and some questions I wanted to ask. And, we talked just like we're talking right now, and they bring up things and they would give me ideas for more questions. And then they'd be, they would almost be like, like after I'd finish, hey, have you ever thought about interviewing such and such? I'm like, no, I haven't, like, here's their number. Great. So I reach out to them and then they tell me the same thing when I interview them and, and so on and so on and so on. But that's how it got started. Literally right before the pandemic, I started the channel, and then the idea to interview sprung from there, just because I'm like, this would be nice. And also I felt like this would be my way of kind of giving back. So Kung Fu is like my root, my traditional martial art, and to give back to it, not only in the past teaching, but now I can give back by putting a spotlight on some of these local instructors. And then from the local instructor side, again, during the pandemic, I had the idea, oh, why don't I actually, reach out to a few people who, I just would want to see if they'd be interested in an interview. So, I took chances with people who were like a little more famous here and there. And sometimes you get a response and you're like, sure. And you're like, really? And then, so things kind of springboard from there. And again, it's just like networking with other things in martial arts. You network doing this stuff. And people know people that you don't know. And all of a sudden you're linking up and getting even bigger guests than you thought you could.
Yeah, no, I love that, because my initial, we started, pretty similar time, right? It was around the beginning of the pandemic. I wasn't, the reason was I wasn't teaching. All my instructors were teaching online, and they had like this constant interaction. And I was like, well, I don't really have a thing right now because I wasn't teaching, I'm like, and I came same. My idea right off the bat was, I'm going to interview martial artists that I know that have either taught me or inspired me or motivated me in some way. And
Yeah.
then, it kind of started sprinkling in, different leaders. I had some great female entrepreneurs that I brought on. Then they started introducing me to authors and speakers, and so it went from, okay, I'm going to do this little martial arts show, into like, now I can't really say that it's a martial arts show. It's just kind of
Yeah.
opened up quite a bit.
You got a lot of people. That's great.
Well, so my question is though, like, your subscriber base has gone through the roof. What has been the biggest contributor to getting to 10,000 subscribers on your channel?
I mean, it's awesome, man. It's like, and you're always working. I think the main thing is the key is consistency. Like you're probably seeing now. It's like, even when you're like, going through it and you're tired and don't want to, you keep pushing yourself to do it. Because I initially started seeing a little bit of success and like things kind of bubbling a little bit more. The more I would just put out content on a regular basis. I think at first I started, every 2 weeks is fine. Then I started getting like, okay, it's got to be at least once a week I'm putting out some sort of content. And with the interviews, when I first started, I was like, I was super motivated. So I would like turn these things around in a couple of days. I'd like, a weekend would be shot and I'd be like, all right, done. It's going up on Monday, and then I do another one. It's like, so I had this crazy schedule at first, but the consistency definitely started to help. Then once in a while you'll get a little buzz. You'll get because you got to be open to doing different things, right? So not only do I interview, I do interviews like you're doing as well, but I have like other things where like I'll tackle other topics. I had a video where I actually talked about forms versus fighting. That got a little buzz, and a lot of people saw that who were like in the martial arts world who I didn't even know. And then someone mentioned me on their page, and then I started getting subscribers through those people. And then people will write you. It's like, hey, I found you through such and such, or I found you through such. So you don't even know. And then, the internet's forever, right? So you can have a video that you did 2 years ago that people will just not start watching, and you get on that, and you're like, oh man, I haven't even thought about that video in a while. So a lot of it, I really give credit just to the consistency. It's really, that's the main thing starting, but also being a, student of the craft. So this was something new to me, the whole YouTube world, kind of learning how the algorithm works and how to kind of like, they call it SEO, is search engine optimization, how to like better title your videos and things, and like putting the right thumbnails in front of things so people at least want to click on and actually start watching. So I learned things like that through people that were also on YouTube. And then there were some Facebook groups that I joined where they really go in depth about, like working like your content to make it better, equipment you can use to make things better, all that kind of stuff. So I really started becoming more of a student of the game. Like I want to say in the last year or so, I was really like, all right, I'm going to really start focusing on how to grow the audience, what the audience wants. Because when you start learning, like really getting into your head, this like, it's not really about you as much versus what your audience wants to see. And then when you kind of get that and that you kind of find some things, it's like, okay, this is working. You just start doubling down on the stuff that really does work for you. And you'll start seeing your base grow and grow and grow. And people will tell you, because it's like the stuff that you do where it's like, oh, I love it's going to be like that too. It's like the stuff that you'll do that you love, that there are people who like, you get a few views. You're like, man, but I worked so hard on that. And then there'll be stuff that's like, oh, this is just something. And then like all of a sudden you get all these views. Like, why do people like this video? But it's like, you got to just go with it,
Right. Yeah. Who's been your favorite guest, or what's your favorite video that you've done?
Wow. Favorite guest is good because I just recently, as you know, I interviewed Sensei Benny Urquidez. That took a while to happen. I was really proud of that one. And it was so much fun talking to that guy. As you know, he's just a wealth of knowledge. He's one of my at least top 5. I got to interview Sensei Don the Dragon Wilson. That was also a lot of fun. Who else was really good? Her name's Michelle Manu. She does Polynesian martial arts. It's called Lua. That was a really fun interview. She's like a wealth of knowledge, super smart. She did football in her career, did all these things, and she's a martial artist, like a badass. Actually, she knows one of our classmates, Tori Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence,
I know Tori.
Yeah. So he's heavy now doing his acting thing. So they're linked on that level, and I didn't even know that. So when I talked to her, she does some acting on the side as well, and like martial arts choreography. That was a big favorite for me. And I'm trying to think who. Oh, you know what? There's this guy. I'm not sure if you're familiar. He's a director and kind of a commentator, Bay Logan. I actually happened to reach out to him on a humbug, like I'm going through Facebook and he was a friend. So I was like, yeah, shoot him a message. And he responded and he was like, yeah, I'll do an interview. And the guy's famous for doing all these commentaries on these old school martial art movies. And I told him, hey, that's how I got hip to you. He wrote this book that I was familiar with. And so, yeah, and he directed the second Crouching Tiger. So not the main one that everybody knows, but the second one that Michelle Yeoh was also in, but he directed that one. So he knows a lot of people in the game, like, Michelle Yeoh and Jet Li and all these people. So yeah, that was a big one for me too.
What's the goal moving forward for the podcast? Is it more of a passion project, or is this an income generator for you?
Yeah, it's not so much income because again, that's a slow process. There's some ad revenue you can get, but a lot of it's the opportunities that will come from people seeing you and then wanting you to promote their stuff. So that's how people in YouTube make a lot more money on that end. For me, though, it still continues to be the passion project. I enjoy doing it. The give back factor is big for me. So the future, hopefully, we get to even bigger and better on the interview side. And I'm still talking to people. We're always working behind the scenes. It's like, okay, I'm working on this person next and that person next. But also, different ideas for different videos, different things. I've done some tutorial type videos, which can be fun, when people are like trying to learn. So back to your point about when people were training and teaching online, that was also, I wanted to have another way to give back. So like I've done a couple like how to work this weapon, how to work that weapon. I've done a few videos like that. So I think I'm going to continue in that lane, and the interviews will continue, and, just seeing how far I can push it,
Excellent. Cool. Well, listen, we're going to wrap things up. I appreciate you being on the show today and sharing, a lot about your podcast and your Kung Fu training, Krav Maga, being, radio, all of this experience. I think it's just been fun having the chat. Look forward to catching up in the future, being on the mat with you again. Absolutely. And we'll see you real soon. So guys, thank you for watching today. Tune in and make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'll be back on again later this week on Friday and a couple times next week as well. So hope to see you guys soon. Thanks, Kwazi.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Bye.